There's a place in Africa overflowing with oil, yet millions still struggle to find clean water. A country rich enough to shine, but haunted by its own success. Welcome to Angola, where every barrel of oil tells a story of power, protest, and paradox. Before you scroll away, think about this. How can a nation this wealthy still battle hunger, corruption, and chaos? Let's find out. Comment, learning something new if this already surprised you. I'll be watching to see how far you make it. Angola's story begins beneath its soil, in the dark, slick rivers of crude oil that define its economy. Since independence, oil has been both a blessing and a curse. It powers the nation's dreams, but chains its future to global markets it can't control. About 95% of Angola's exports come from oil. It brings in over half of all government revenue. Sounds incredible, right? But here's the catch. When oil prices drop, the entire economy trembles. Imagine building your house on gold that melts every time the sun hits it. That's Angola's economy. It grows fast when oil prices rise. But when they fall, jobs vanish, savings evaporate, and inflation roars. And that fragility didn't just hit the economy, it shaped politics, culture, and trust. Because when wealth pools at the top, people at the bottom start asking, where did it all go? Question for you. If you lived in a country this rich in oil, but saw no change in your life, how long would you stay silent? In mid-2025, the spark finally hit the oil. The government announced the removal of long-standing fuel subsidies, a policy meant to save billions, encouraged by the IMF. But for everyday Angolans, it meant disaster. Overnight, diesel prices jumped by 1/3. Taxi drivers couldn't afford fuel, food prices soared, and frustration, years in the making, exploded. In Luanda, thousands took to the streets. But this wasn't just a city protest. It spread across provinces, uniting people in anger and fear. The government tried to keep order, but chaos broke out. Shops were looted, buses torched, streets blocked with burning tires. By the end of July, at least 22 people were dead, more than 1,200 arrested, and the world finally looked at Angola not for its oil, but for its unrest. And here's the bitter irony. The very thing meant to stabilize the economy almost tore the nation apart. Oil made Angola rich, but fuel made it burn. If you've ever seen how small economic changes destroy real lives, drop a thunder emoji and in the comments. I'm curious how many of you relate to this. When protests roar, power often responds with silence and laws. In recent years, Angola's government passed a wave of legislation tightening control over media, speech, and assembly. Critics say it's about order. Activists say it's about fear. Because when words become dangerous, truth becomes rare. In 2024, Human Rights Watch warned about harsh penalties for protests and speech deemed disruptive. By 2025, the country even blocked opposition figures from attending a democracy conference abroad, citing visa irregularities. Coincidence or control? Inside the country, journalists face intimidation, independent media struggles for survival, and social media platforms feel the chill of censorship. It's a familiar playbook. Silence the noise before it grows too loud. But here's the problem. When a government restricts expression, anger doesn't disappear. It simmers, under pressure. And when the lid finally blows, it's not just noise anymore. It's an explosion. What would you do if speaking your mind could get you jailed? Let's be real. Most wouldn't risk it. Comment freedom if you value your voice. Angola has been fighting corruption for decades, and it's a war without a clear winner. For a while, the world believed things were improving. Investigations started, assets were frozen, transparency laws were introduced. But underneath that progress, another story was unfolding. By 2025, watchdogs began to notice the cracks. Public contract awards, still murky. Institutional independence, fading. Technical capacity, weak. Even the IMF, the global watchdog, warned that Angola's reform momentum could collapse as the 2027 elections approach. So the question isn't whether Angola wants to reform, it's whether it can. Because corruption doesn't just steal money, it steals trust. And once a nation loses trust, every policy feels like betrayal. Think about it. When leaders promise a better life, but inflation keeps rising, when transparency laws exist on paper but not in practice, how long before people give up believing anything will change? Comment truth if you think transparency is the real currency of leadership. Beneath the headlines and protests, there are real people just trying to survive. A mother in Huambo, waking at dawn to fetch water miles away. A taxi driver in Luanda, debating whether to buy fuel or feed his kids. A young graduate who can't find work because every job requires connections. Despite its oil wealth, Angola has one of the highest poverty rates in southern Africa. Millions live on less than $2 a day. Hospitals lack medicine. Schools struggle with basic supplies. But here's the twist. Drive through Luanda's coast and you'll see glittering towers, luxury cars, and million-dollar mansions. It's a tale of two Angolas, one for the powerful and one for everyone else. And this inequality doesn't just breed resentment, it breeds desperation. Because when people see what could be theirs but isn't, the anger doesn't fade, it grows. What would you do if your country's wealth never reached your hands? Comment change if you believe every citizen deserves a share. Not everything is bleak. There's movement, slow but real. Projects like the Libido Corridor are transforming trade routes, connecting Angola to the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. The goal? Make Angola a regional logistics powerhouse. And it's not just railways. Highways, ports, and digital infrastructure are expanding piece by piece. If managed right, these could redefine Angola's economy, reducing dependence on oil and diversifying industries like agriculture and manufacturing. But here's the danger. Without accountability, these projects risk becoming new playgrounds for old corruption. Every contract, every foreign deal, every loan, another test of integrity. Still, hope is alive. Angola's youth are educated, vocal, and connected to the world like never before. Social media is giving them a voice, and they're using it. They're not waiting for change. They're demanding it. Comment future if you believe Africa's next generation will lead the transformation. So where does Angola go from here? It's standing on a razor's edge, between progress and collapse. On one side, reformers push for transparency, infrastructure, and global trust. On the other, corruption, repression, and inequality drag it backward. The coming years will decide which side wins. Will oil finally serve the people instead of politics? Will voices rise louder than fear? Or will silence swallow another chapter of potential? Angola's story isn't over. It's being written right now, by its leaders, by its youth, by the millions who refuse to stop hoping. If you've watched this far, I want to know, what do you think Angola needs most? Leadership, education, or opportunity? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you learned something new today, hit that like button. Not for me, but so more people see this story that deserves to be told. Because every country has two sides. The one you see, and the one that's hidden behind silence. And in Angola, silence is no longer an option. If this kind of storytelling opened your eyes, subscribe, because we're diving into more nations whose true stories rarely get told. And don't just scroll away. Share this with someone who still thinks Africa's wealth equals happiness, because as you just learned, the truth is far more complicated.